Chapter 311. Vhagar the Devourer. I think I've told you this before, but I always had an ability to just disconnect with my emotions when I wanted to. To act without any hesitation and move toward the outcome I needed to achieve. To simply blank out my mind and replace all other thoughts with cold logic. I remember the very first time I faced a spirit beast back in my family's private dungeon. It was when I was a kid. I wasn't even an awakened. Obviously, I lost in seconds. The beast trapped had me under its claws and was about to make a feast out of my flesh. But even as I watched its disgusting maw draw closer, I felt nothing at all. All I remember thinking was, that's it. Ever since then, I had countless near-death encounters. I had faced people bigger and stronger than, people more experienced than me who had no qualms about killing. I had been beaten to an inch of my life on multiple different occasions. I had screamed and bled and broken more bones than I cared to remember. But every single time, when the moment came, when fear should have rooted me in place and panic should have clouded my judgment, something inside me simply clicked off. I never trembled or fell to desperation. There wasn't any heroic resolve either. Just silence. Simple as that. That's the same reaction I had when I saw Vhagar at the top of the caldera for the first time. I knew all the terrible stories about him. I knew how dangerous he could be. And while I felt the wave of terror radiating from him getting stronger and stronger the closer we got to him, I didn't feel fear. Okay, well, I did. But that wasn't real fear. It wasn't mine. It was artificial, shoved upon me by an external force. Crushing spiritual pressure and murderous intent, that's all it was. A projected emotion, sharpened and refined into something that bypassed reason and went straight for the instincts. Vhagar wasn't just frightening because he was strong. He was frightening because he wanted you to be afraid. That fear crawled over my skin like a foreign thing, whispering run into my bones, urging my body to betray my mind. But just like always, click, I shut it off. Like flipping a switch, I shut off any awe, dread, or an instinctive urge to kneel or flee that I might have felt. So instead, when I saw the 8th Demon Prince, I saw him just to make a clean, clinical assessment. Vhagar stood at the heart of the caldera like a blight carved into reality itself. The air around him warped, like when you'd see heat shimmering off asphalt on a particular hot summer day. Only here, it wasn't because of heat, but due to the sheer density of his presence. Cracked obsidian floated lazily around his body, caught in invisible currents of power. He was bigger than I imagined, towering well over 12 feet tall. I figured I'd barely reach the end of his torso if I were to stand next to him. Appearance-wise, he looked like a human. Well, if humans had lanky frames, glossy black skin, sharp spikes protruding from their spine, and thin arms that reached till their knees and ended in clawed hands with too many joints to look natural. His face was almost handsome in an unsettling sort of way with sharp cheekbones, a narrow jaw, and eyes like burning embers sunk too deep into their sockets. 2 horns curved back from his temples, smooth and polished, as if they'd been worn down by time rather than grown. A long mane of ashen hair spilled down his back, drifting weightlessly as though submerged in water. Oh, and, speaking of water, the entire caldera, which was thousands of yards in diameter, to give you an idea, was filled with a shallow lilac pond. Patches of violet heather-like flowers bloomed in that lilac pond, dotting the surface. And standing in the middle of it all, Vhagar looked as divine as he was unholy, as tragic as he was evil, and as terrifying as anything I'd ever faced. By now, everyone else had also reached the top and were standing at the ridge of the caldera, looking down at the basin-shaped depression, and at the monstrosity at its center. Unlike me, most of them were visibly shaken. Lily nearly collapsed under the weight of Vhagar's presence. Ray, too, almost doubled over. Kong found his legs wobbling slightly, and even Alexia had trouble standing straight. Only Michael seemed somewhat immune. Juliana was slightly better. Kevin was obviously loving here, since he was rapidly eating our excess negativity. So much so that I swear I saw him immediately grow a couple of inches. But the one who surprised me the most was Vince. He managed to keep his composure on the level of both Juliana and Michael. Yes, he was gritting his teeth and inside of his cheek every now and again, but otherwise he looked fine. I guess I shouldn't have been so surprised. Fear stops having a hold on you once you've seen the worst of what life can throw at you. Once your body and mind have been destroyed and rebuilt enough times, the very concept of fear becomes just another variable to calculate rather than a sensation to succumb to. And life hasn't exactly been kind to Vince. So, yeah, he was taking it better than the majority of our party, which he proved with a joke, that's him. After your scary story of him devouring a whole world, Sam, I expected someone bigger. That diffused the situation a bit. Lily and Alexia managed a chuckle between labored breaths. Ray rolled his eyes. You can have the front line if you're that disappointed, bud. Michael shook his head at them, then faced me. Should we try going through the air, flying over his head across the caldera? I looked past Vagar and saw the entrance of a dark cavern that I no doubt was leading to the Valley of the God Who Eats Us, precisely where we needed to go. Unfortunately, like I said, it was past Vagar. After a thoughtful moment, I clicked my tongue. No need. We'll be vulnerable midair. I'd been hoping to find Vagar hog-tied and fastened to the ground with chains and shackles. Instead, I found just 4 golden ropes tied around his limbs and one around his neck like he was some petty criminal being transported in leg irons, collar, and handcuffs, not of a mythical being capable of unimaginable destruction. In fact, the glimmering cords tied around all 4 of his ankle joints and neck allowed him enough slack to easily walk around if he wanted. The restraints didn't even appear to be anchored to the ground. I wasn't sure what was keeping Vagar from leaving the caldera whenever he wished. Did the monarchs just politely ask him to stay here? No, really. If I was Duchess Sophia Zen Valkrin, the woman who died during the battle against that guy, I would have been livid at the monarchs and the other dukes for pulling off this tawdry work at the cost of my sacrifice. Okay, then, whispered Ray. Guess we really have no choice but to. Thump. Whatever words he was about to utter stayed stuck in his throat. Everyone's breath hitched and I even felt my blood freeze in my veins. Because in that instance, Vagar's head tilted slightly. His smoldering eyes glowed brighter, and locked onto us with a sniper's precision. Cease the chatter and come down here, fledglings. Accompany me. Chapter 312. Vagar the Devourer 2. I immediately revised my impression of the 8th Demon Prince. I was now, in fact, a little terrified of him. Because when he spoke, his voice washed over us with such pulverizing pressure that it felt like we were standing under a waterfall. I had to make an effort not to cave under the weight and sag to the ground. If his mere voice held so much power, I didn't even want to imagine what he himself might be capable of. I glanced at my companions. Their pale faces, sweat-slicked foreheads, and pained expressions told me they had reached the same conclusion as me. This might be a battle way out of our league. Thankfully, we weren't going in with the intention to win. All we had to do was get past him. If we could just manage that, then I'd consider that a victory in itself. So we started moving. Michael and Alexia did. I followed a step behind with slight reluctance, weighing my options. Did we really need to fight a demonic beast to get out of here? Why did we want to get out anyway? We could just live the rest of our lives here in a pretty little hut, or something like that. But then I really considered, the idea of spending the rest of my life in the exasperating company of these fools. And immediately decided that facing potential death was much better than that miserable fate. So with careful steps down the slope of the caldera, our boots disturbing the shallow lilac water and stepping over those slick heather-like flowers, we began descending into the basin. Every step closer to that demon made the weight on us even heavier. His spiritual pressure was like an authority. Like the world wasn't asking us to kneel before him, because that was already expected. Like gravity decided, on a whim, that we were not allowed to stand upright. When we were close enough that I had to crane my neck to meet his smoldering gaze, he finally spoke again. Ah, young children, have your protectors sent you all here to me as offerings? The slit of his mouth was far too wide. So when his lips curved up, it would have been a smile, if not for how wrong it looked on his face. Touching as that notion may be, I find it difficult to believe they would be so generous. The pressure intensified, but not explosively. No, that would have been merciful. It increased gradually, inexorably, like a tightening vice. Luckily, we were already getting used to it. Unluckily, Vagar took a step forward, as if to show he wasn't as restrained as I'd liked him to. I stiffened. Damn it. The lilac water parted around his foot in a perfect circle. Let me be clear, it didn't splash or ripple, it simply moved aside, as if Vagar's entire body was encased in an invisible force field. And it was. The very air surrounding him was trembling, vibrating, distorting. I smell intent upon thee. I smell necessity, he went on as I realized that his voice, underneath all that oppressive weight, was so rich and smooth and charmingly deep. Oh, I do love necessity. It drives feeble mortals to such witless choices. To trespass where they ought not tread and bare their throats to me. Juliana shifted beside me, undoubtedly as uncomfortable as I was. To my right, I noticed Alexia had already begun using her powers to not only stabilize her footing, but also to throw the first punch as soon as an opening appeared. God, she really never missed a chance to throw hands. Vince, I noted, had gone completely still, way too still, like he did when he was thinking 5 steps ahead and none of them were pleasant. We aren't here to fight you, Michael spoke up, his voice steady through sheer force of will. We only wish to pass. Vhagar laughed, sounding neither loud nor cruel, only amused. Pass, he echoed, as if tasting how ridiculous the word sounded against his tongue. Through me. Then he leaned down slightly, bringing his face closer to ours. I felt intense heat oozing off from him that, even though it wasn't physical, made my skin prickle like I'd stepped too close to a furnace. Foolish child, he said to Michael, if passage were so easily granted, then fate wouldn't have put me in your path. His gaze drifted across the group once more, slowly this time. Lily flinched when it lingered on her. Ray held his ground with a clenched jaw. And Kang's eyes were nothing if not defiant. To his credit, even Kevin puffed himself up indignantly, which might have been brave if it wasn't also deeply stupid. Vhagar looked at our pet bird with visible confusion, then decided it wasn't important and finally dropped his gaze onto the last 2 people of the group, Alexia and me. He straightened, looking curious. If he had eyebrows, I'd imagine one of them would be raised right now. You two, he said to us, his voice lowering and the weight of it thickening like tar, look familiar. What is your name? I was about to give him some stupid alias. Why would I give a demon my real name, when I'm the relative of one of the people who sealed him here, right? That was common sense. But as I soon found out, common sense wasn't so common. He's Samael Kaiser Theosbane, and I'm Alexia von Zinks. Alexia declared even on my behalf. I wanted to bash my head against the nearest rock. Vhagar tilted his head as his smoldering eyes bore into me and Alexia in tandem. Then he smiled again. The descendants of the ones who imprisoned me. Interesting, he scoffed at Alexia, then completely ignored her and turned to me. Theosbane, huh, your father was strong enough to warrant my respect. Are you even half the man he was, child? He took another step closer, this time specifically toward me. And despite wanting to put some distance between us, I found myself unable to move back. Because if you are, he looked straight down into my eyes, I'll grant you the honor of becoming my vessel. Chapter 313, I rejected a demon and now he's angry. To say I was taken aback or at a loss for words would not only sound cliché but also be the biggest understatement of my life. Don't get me wrong, I, indeed, had no idea how to respond to a proposal like that. It's not every day that a being of inconceivable power, a master of knowledge so ancient that it dates back to the creation of gods, asks you to be his vessel. What could I have even said to that? Surely not, no thanks. It's not you, it's me. I hope you find your perfect vessel, but I think we're better off as friends. I stared up at him in silence, my mind running through exactly 0 useful responses. No, because really, what was the correct etiquette here? Was there some ancient protocol for declining possession by a demon prince? A polite bow with a formal apology? Or should I prepare a fruit basket for him? Sadly, neither my past life nor this one had prepared me for that social scenario. Vhagar watched me closely, clearly expecting something. His presence pressed down on me a little harder, as if my hesitation itself had offended him. Well, he prompted, amusement clear in his voice. Has your tongue been stolen, child? Or are you simply weighing the honor I bestow? Ah, so silence was not an acceptable answer. Got it. I brought a hand up to rub my temple and sighed. Okay, first of all, respectfully, no. That single word echoed strangely in the caldera, and Vhagar blinked like he didn't understand. No, he repeated softly. Yeah, no, I confirmed with a nod. You see, Lord Vhagar, I deeply love my life. If I become your vessel, I'd be unable to control your power and you'll overtake my body. I don't want that. I'm good. Thank you for the offer, though. I'm flattered. For a long moment, absolutely nothing happened. I was not immediately turned into a smear of dust. The caldera did not explode. The sky did not tear open, well, more than it already had long ago. Vhagar simply stared at me. Then, he started laughing. And I don't mean the cruel cackle of a mad demon either. No, he started laughing like he was genuinely amused. But we were not amused. We were the opposite of amused. We were anxious, mere moments away from breaking into a panicked frenzy. Thankfully, before any of us lost our nerves, Vhagar extended a hand and pointed a finger downward. I frowned, but decided to follow what he was pointing at. Down, right at my feet, more specifically, toward my reflection in the lilac water. Or should I say, the lack of it. My heart froze. I wish I was being metaphoric. But no, my heart genuinely stuttered in my chest for half a beat as my eyes darted across the shallow pond. There was Juliana's reflection, sharp and clear beside me. Alexia's too, slightly blurred, but unmistakably there. Michael, Ray, Vince, Lily, Kong, even Kevin, puffed up and ugly as ever. Everyone else could be seen in the water. And then there was me. Or rather, there wasn't. My breathing hardened the moment I recalled this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. While traveling here, on the day we encountered Michael's clone, we stumbled across a river of lilac water that reflected everyone's face except mine. Lilac water, the same as this. I whipped my head around until something caught my eye. In the distance, there was a small crack in the slope of the basin, slowly draining the lilac pond into what must have made a narrow river streaming down the outside of this caldera wall. I didn't know how it reached the upper tiers of the jungle if it originated from here, but I had no doubt, that river and this pond had the same water. For reasons beyond my own understanding, that realization settled into my bones like a creeping chill. Vhagar's nose quivered as if he could smell my apprehension. His smile then widened as he gestured around at the blooming purple flowers. All the heather you see here has bloomed from my spilled blood. They create a mist that, when condensed, creates this beautiful lilac water. But it's not an ordinary liquid. It is a mirror of destiny itself. A byproduct of my blood, steeped in causality, soaked through with the loom of fate. My throat went dry. When a soul gazes upon it, he continued, the water reflects not the flesh, but the thread of their fate. So long as that thread yet stretches forward, so long as life has distance still to travel, the reflection remains. But when the loom begins to fray, when the end of a life draws close enough to be inevitable rather than merely possible, the reflection fades. Silence swallowed the caldera. I didn't need him to say it. I already understood what he wanted to imply. But he said it anyway. And when the loom has nothing left to give, when a fate has reached its terminus, when there is no ordained future left to reflect, there is nothing for this water to show. In simple words, child, your death is near. You are fated to die before ever stepping out of this jungle. Which, in turn, meant that I still hadn't escaped my destined end. Well, fuck. Around me, I could feel the others stiffen. Juliana was the first to look down. Then Alexia. Then Michael. One by one, their gazes dropped to the water, and then snapped back to me. But I wasn't as worried as someone prophesied to die should be. Because there was something else on my mind. Why do you want me as your vessel then? I asked before pointing to Michael. Why not, say, him? His reflection is still there. So he still has a lot of life to live. Michael gave me a startled look that said, dude. Really? Vhagar shook his head. When you inherit a vessel like that, you also inherit its fate. If there is a choice, then it's better to claim one whose thread is about to be severed. A fate that has reached its terminus is malleable. An empty slate where there is room to write anew. Then his smile sharpened. Like you stand at the edge of inevitability. Your loom has declared you finished. The world has already accounted for your absence. So, become my vessel, child. I'll save you from your end. I'll make you great. I'll even let your allies live and give them passage. In return, you won't have to trade much, just yourself. I didn't answer immediately. After pretending to think it over, I replied with a small shake of my own head. Let me get this straight. You're offering me power in exchange for self. Unrivaled strength in exchange for identity. You save me from a fate I apparently can't escape, and in return, I stop being me. That about right? Vhagar inclined his head slightly, like a king acknowledging a correct summary. Succinct. Accurate. Right. I exhaled slowly. Then let me rephrase my earlier answer. The air felt thicker. Even the lilac water seemed to still. No. This time, the word didn't echo. This time, there was no confusion. This time, Vhagar didn't laugh. I'm demanding your life, one that's already at its end, in exchange for your friends. And that's your final answer? Yeah. His expression softened. So be it. I'll just have to content myself by devouring you all. The moment those words left his lips, all hell broke loose. First, the whole caldera started to shudder. Then, without any warning, one of his claws zoomed in on me, descending toward my neck like the blade of a guillotine. But before it could reach anywhere near my flesh, a sleek kunai streaked through the air in a flash of silver light and slammed into Vagar's claw with a sharp clang. It didn't pierce him, of course it didn't, but the blow deflected the incoming strike just enough to save my neck by a wide margin. The claw veered off course and carved through empty air instead, the pressure alone blasting the lilac water upward in a spiraling shockwave. The pond erupted and the flowers shredded. But I didn't move a muscle and kept standing right there in place, looking him dead in the eyes. Then we're left with no choice but to shove you aside by force, demon. Chapter 314, Fight Against the Moon Eater. As expected, Vagar did not take kindly to my words. The shockwave from his deflected claw finished crashing outward, lilac water raining back down in heavy sheets. Shredded petals drifted through the air like violet snowflakes, and I still didn't move an inch from my spot. I held his gaze, as if daring him to attack again. And attack he did. Turbulent vibrations tore through the air as the 8th demon prince moved. One moment, he stood where he had been standing. The next, his figure vanished in the blink of an eye, not from speed alone, but from the sheer collapse of space around him. The lilac pond imploded where his feet were, water and flowers folding upward as if gravity itself had inverted to accommodate his will. Alexia, right, Lily shouted from the back rank, just a split second before Vagar reappeared. Alexia heeded the warning instantly. Drawing upon the maximum force of her innate power, she reinforced her body with aura until her entire armor-clad body was outlined in a faint orange radiance. Yeah, she had summoned her bronze armor, cuirass, vambraces, greaves, and a plumed helmet, while the rest of her exposed parts were wrapped in black leather straps. She looked nothing short of a Greek warrior princess, when a massive claw slammed into her raised forearm. Boom! The impact reverberated like a fired siege weapon. Lilac water flash evaporated into steam, and the basin floor cracked outward in concentric rings. Alexia was driven back a full dozen meters, her boots carving deep trenches through stone, yet she somehow managed to stay upright, even if only barely. With teeth clenched and veins standing out along her neck, her aura flared intensely as she shrugged off the pain like it was nothing. Vince, who had brought out his full deck and was already in the middle of buffing everyone to the absolute limit his soul arsenal allowed, shot her a worried glance. I'm fine, she snapped, even as her arm trembled. Don't let that bastard chain his attacks. That bastard chained the attacks. Before we could even think about closing in, Vagar's other arm swept out in a wide arc. Once again, just a fraction of a second before he could carry out the swing to completion, Lily shouted at the top of her lungs, "Scatter!" On cue, as soon as Vagar's claws finished slicing through empty space, a booming thrum screeched across the entire caldera. Then there was a flicker of bright flash around him, like the afterimage of a lightning strike, before the world caught up. The space his claw had passed through detonated a heartbeat later. A crescent-shaped wave of compressed force tore through the basin, sundering lilac water, stone, and flowers alike, as if reality itself was being shaved away. A moment after that, across the pond, a massive section of the caldera's sloping wall exploded into a deluge of crumbled chunks of rock. And while we dispersed just in time to avoid the direct hit, the displaced air still slammed into us with monumental force, sending us tumbling across the uneven ground like ragdolls. It felt like getting smacked by a speeding car. I hit the basin floor hard, water erupting violently around me. My ears rang as dust and petals stung my eyes, but I scrambled upright almost instantly. Essence surged through my body on its own, stabilizing my footing and reinforcing my limbs before I could even think. I then looked around to see my companions had picked themselves up as well. Michael, in particular, looked like he didn't even fall. He was staring at Vagar with a mix of fear and awe and anger. I knew exactly what he was thinking. And I shared his thoughts. The Moon Eater's actual attack didn't so much as even graze us directly, yet it was enough to knock us around like toys. I didn't want to imagine what would have happened if it had connected. We wouldn't simply have been injured. We would have been pulverized, reduced to a minced paste of flesh and bone. Ahead of us, the towering 12-foot demon glanced down at his own hand, looking all too pleased with himself. Around him, the air continued to buzz and vibrate discordantly, droplets of lilac water suspended mid-fall in a quivering state, as if gravity had stopped trying anymore. Futile, fractured, fragile, he intoned, each word leaving his lips echoing like a death knell. That is what you all are. I felt a pang of irritation and tightened my grip around the scorched oath. If that's how weak we are, then why are you the one trapped here? Juliana, standing next to me, gave me a sideways look that very clearly asked, is provoking him really the smartest move right now? Vhagar scoffed like he didn't mind. Truthfully, because it was written in the stars. I was fated to lose that day, so I did. Your protectors sealed me with. He gestured lazily at the shimmering golden cords wrapped around his limbs and neck, restraints forged from there. Will. At first, they rendered me immobile and suppressed. But with time, they weakened enough for me to walk. Now, I can wield my power. His gaze burned brighter. I cannot yet leave. The farther I stray from the center, the heavier the chains become. But my freedom is close. Sooner or later, these bindings will rot away completely. And when they do, your protectors will not be enough to save your world from what follows. And how do you know that? Alexia shouted, slowly circling to position herself behind him. Is that written in the stars too? Vhagar shifted his ember-like eyes toward her, but he didn't fully turn. Yes, it is. I have read the fate of your world. I have seen how this story ends. You cannot fight it, only kneel. Fate does not bend to anyone. Believe me, I have tried. Oh, I do, I said, barely bothering to mask the edge in my voice. I know all about your attempts. I know how you destroyed your own world, Devourer. Just because you gave up and surrendered to Heaven's will doesn't mean we will. His lips curled back, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Gave up, surrendered, to Heaven's will. You mean the gods? He laughed softly. I didn't like that laugh, though I could hear the disdain present. Your tongue outpaces your wit, child. You speak of things you cannot possibly comprehend. I did not give up. I did not surrender, not to the gods, because fate is not Heaven's will. Chapter 315, Fight Against the Moon Eater 2. I was confused. What did he mean by, fate isn't Heaven's will? Then what was it? Frowning, I was about to press him for an answer when Michael suddenly raised another, equally important question. If the restraints are going to rot away on their own anyway, and fate cannot be changed, then why are you even trying to kill us? He asked. You said it yourself. Leaving one of us aside, we aren't supposed to die right now. So why bother? Vhagar looked almost amused at that, like he'd been asked something absurd, on the level of why the sky was blue or fire was hot. Just because the course of a story is already decided, he explained calmly, doesn't mean its characters must stop performing, right? He lifted one clawed hand. Around him, the suspended droplets of lilac water trembled harder, some bursting into mist as if crushed by invisible pressure. We tensed, preparing for another attack that didn't come immediately. Fate dictates outcomes, he continued, not the methods nor the paths taken to reach them. You are all destined to survive the foreseeable future, but whoever said you'd survive unscathed? Then his gaze shifted and locked onto me. The weight of it slammed down on me like a mountain was dropped squarely onto my shoulders. His fate, however, is already clear, said Vhagar. In fact, it has already collapsed. He will die. That outcome is absolute. Then he casually hooked a thumb, if that grotesque appendage could be called one, over his shoulder to point straight at Alexia, and hers, he went on, as unresolved. She may die, or she may survive with a fatal wound. Hard to tell in my current, suppressed state. Either way, that uncertainty makes her useful to me too. They both are. His eyes gleamed. I can bend one's thread, or weave new ones for the other. The boy, especially, is unique. A hint of fascination found its way into his voice. Because it's impossibly rare to encounter mortals still walking around whose death has already caught up to them. I rolled my eyes. So basically, you're just being a bitch because someone special rejected you. Vhagar paused, then stared at me with an utterly bamboozled expression, which, I'd admit, looked comical on him. What? Is that all you understood from my KWA boom? A lance of condensed white light came whistling through the air and detonated against his ribs, igniting a roaring explosion. The suspended lilac water was blasted apart in every direction, droplets bursting into vapor as the shockwave tore through them. For a fraction of a second, the 8th Demon Prince was forced sideways as a massive cloud of dust erupted between us. On our left, Ray stood with his arm extended and palm smoking, veins of light crawling up his forearm like molten cracks in porcelain. That was his new upgrade, by the way. He could supercharge his explosions now and compress them into lances, significantly extending his attack range. Go, Michael shouted instantly, but he didn't need to. Lily and Vince were already sprinting past the smoke-shrouded Moon Eater, dashing toward the cavern entrance behind him at full speed. Alexia, meanwhile, didn't wait for the dust to settle and just charged in. Before this battle began, I had made it very clear to everyone that we'd not engage in a hand-to-hand brawl with Vhagar. Not only did he have the size advantage over us little humans, but also because if Vhagar so much as scratched us with his claws, he could form a link and corrupt our souls. And once corrupted, we'd become his vessels. Meaning, every shred of logic said Alexia shouldn't be doing this. But when has logic ever stood in the way of a Zinx? So there she was, barreling toward Vhagar to beat him up as if he owed her money. She tore through the thinning smoke like a comet wrapped in orange light. Inside the swirling dust, a 12-foot large silhouette shifted as Vhagar's demonic form lashed out with a claw. Alexia easily ducked under it and drove a tight fist straight into his side at point-blank range. Crack! The sound of it rang out like a struck bell. Vhagar snarled and twisted, bringing his raised arm down in a vicious counterstrike. But she pivoted beneath the slash, spun with the momentum, then jumped and slammed a knee straight into his abdomen. The impact this time sent a shockwave rippling across the lilac pond. I still didn't approve of her fighting at that range, but I couldn't deny how impressed I was. She was going toe-to-toe with a demon prince. Yes, the demon prince was extremely suppressed and weakened right now, but still. What a prodigy she was. And to her credit, she didn't overcommit. She kicked herself off his unmoving body like she was doing parkour and retreated immediately. Vhagar reached out and tried to get a hold of her, but that opening was all Juliana needed. My shadow sped up the time around her body and rushed forward in a blur of motion, plunging the tip of her rapier into the demon's back. Well, plunging wasn't quite accurate. Her blade didn't pierce his flesh, but the inertia behind the strike was enough to shatter a boulder or two. So it ought to have hurt, right? Especially when Juliana followed up with a flurry of similar thrusts, landing at least 3 more strikes of the same terrifying intensity before Vhagar was able to react. But just like Alexia, Juliana didn't linger. She jumped back to a safe distance. And also just like Alexia, her retreat was covered by me. A colossal hand of stone erupted from the basin floor, surging up beneath the Moon Eater and clamping around his torso before he could even take a step toward Juliana. The colossal stone hand then hoisted him high into the air as another lance of condensed light slammed into his suspended body. The explosion that followed was catastrophic. Ka-boom. Stone, lilac water, and scorched flower petals were all sent flying into a violent storm of shrapnel and rain. The entire basin convulsed like it was being swallowed by a landslide. The resulting shockwave flattened smaller boulders nearby, peeled large chunks from the caldera wall, and threw debris all across the battlefield. For a split heartbeat, everything went still. Then, that same booming thrum from before resounded again. From the epicenter of the blast, a crescent wave of distorted pressure rolled outward and obliterated what remained of my stone construct. Alarmed, I threw my hands up and hastily formed multiple earthen barriers in front of me, only for them to disintegrate instantly upon contact with the incoming attack. The compressed pressure wave screamed toward me, ready to tear me apart when... Cling! Thwam! Michael jumped in front of me and cleaved clean through it. He brandished a dark longsword, its blade layered in writhing, sinister shadows. I've said this before, but this time, I truly meant it. I know I have said this many times before, but this time I truly mean it when I say, I had never been happier to see Michael's stupid face. Ahead of us, the dust cloud shuddered, then collapsed inward, as if something massive had inhaled it. When it cleared, Vhagar descended slowly, like an angel descending from the heavens, looking utterly unharmed. His feet sank into the lilac pond as he touched down. He glanced at Michael, slipping a mildly surprised remark. "Is that my brother's sword? Aren't you very fortunate?" Then he attacked again. Another swing of his claw. Another thrum, and another crushing wave of pressure shot toward us. I immediately erected a tall stone platform and elevated myself off the ground as Michael grit his teeth and brought his sword down in another brutal slash. His blade was again able to cut down the pressure wave, wisps of shadows screaming as they peeled away from the sword like living things. But this cut wasn't clean like the one before. The crescent of distortion fractured into jagged arcs that tore past us on either side, pulverizing stone and water as they went. One sheared through another section of the basin wall behind us, the other detonated against the far edge of the caldera, shaking the entire structure like it was about to cave in. Michael slid back a step, his boots skidding on wet stone and shoulders sagging. But he'd done his job. He'd bought me time. I willed essence into my legs, bent my knees slightly, and launched myself off the platform toward Vhagar like a fired arrow. Mid-air, I spun once and brought my axe down. Vhagar noticed, because of course he did. He reared back a claw to unleash another pressure wave toward me. But right then, a golden lasso snapped tight around his arm. It was Alexia, and she pulled with everything she had. Before Vhagar could react, a flaming lash wrapped around his other arm and yanked it aside. This time it was Kong. Vince was pouring every buff he had into the Teen Wolf, ensuring he wouldn't be overwhelmed by Vhagar's strength and get dragged in instead. I had given Kong this card before the battle. One of his and Alexia's jobs was to do exactly what they were doing right now, create an opening for me to capitalize on. Which I did. The curved blade of Scorched Oath was enveloped by scorching hot blazing flames as I felt it using my essence for fuel. Thwam! The axe came down hard and smashed into Vhagar's face, snapping his head down as I landed in front of him. Without giving him a single second to recover, I twisted my wrists and dragged the axe blade back up. Flames screamed as Scorched Oath left a fiery trail in the air and bashed his chin. Thwam! His head snapped back this time. I spun and swung low, aiming for his knee. Thwam! His leg didn't buckle. If anything, it felt like I was hitting a steel container with a bamboo stick. The sheer density of spiritual pressure around his body was absorbing most of the damage. The Monarch's restraints could suppress his powers, but not that. Still, we didn't relent. Vhagar tugged his left arm inward, yanking Kong off his feet. Despite his partial transformation, Vince's buffs, and special circulation technique, the force was overwhelming and Kong was hurled toward the Moon Eater. Vhagar extended his arm and aligned his claws to impale the boy on it. Tom! But a kunai slammed into his shoulder from behind, knocking his upper body just offline. On the current course, Kong would have slammed into the pond instead of being skewered. So Vhagar adjusted accordingly. If claws wouldn't do, then he lunged toward Kong with his maw. Chapter 316, Fight Against the Moon Eater 3. On the current course, Kong would have slammed into the pond instead of being skewered. So Vhagar lunged forward and snapped his maw shut, his fangs closing on where Kang's neck should have been. But it wasn't, because I dove in from the side at the last moment and hooked an arm around his chest, whisking him away. Vhagar's jaws clamped down on nothing. I hit the ground in a low skid, boots gouging to a stop before I released Kong and shoved him hard in the chest. Go! I shouted, pointing toward where Lily and Vince were standing at the cavern's entrance. Kong nodded once and bolted, steam rising off his partially transformed body as Vince immediately began deploying his buffs on the others. By the time I turned back, Juliana had joined the fray. And my god, was I glad I'd invested in her ascension. She didn't approach Vhagar to attack so much as she overwrote the distance between them to overwhelm him. More than once, her movements broke past the sound barrier in short but violent bursts. All the momentum from her blistering speed was transferred to a compressed pinpoint at the tip of her rapier whenever she thrust it. Every time that thin blade flashed forward and struck Vhagar, it cracked the air apart with a loud sonic boom. Crack, crack, crack. Every strike landed along the same narrow bands of space across Vhagar's torso, hammering relentlessly at the dense spiritual pressure around him like a chisel against stone. Vhagar snarled and swung a claw at her, but by then, Juliana simply wasn't there. Her body rewound, and I meant that literally. Her body literally rewound in time, moving back at breakneck speed to retrace its own path in reverse motion. I blinked once, and she was back where she'd been 3 steps earlier. Then she jumped forward again, but Vhagar had anticipated it and swung at her. This time, she went backward midair like an invisible string from the sky had pulled her up. This happened several more times. Coupling her innate power with a card that blurred her movements and another that made her invisible from time to time, it seemed that even a demon prince as mighty as the Devourer himself struggled to read her attack pattern. Because there wasn't one, his attempts to land a hit grew increasingly desperate and futile, and every missed swipe only created another opening. And Michael exploited every single one of them. His sword painted dark arcs in the air, slashing deep into the demon's pressure field and pushing him back bit by bit, even if never going deep enough to actually cut. Ray didn't stop either. 3 more lances of condensed white light screamed across the battlefield and detonated squarely against Vhagar's face like missiles. KWA boom, KWA boom, KWA boom. The explosions stacked and shockwaves overlapped. And then, Alexia moved back into close quarters as well. She let go of the golden lasso and swept in low without hesitation, striking the same knee I had hit earlier. Thwack. I don't know whether it was because Vhagar was simply overwhelmed by all of us, or her punch really was just that strong, but this time when her blow landed true, Vhagar staggered back a full step. He growled in frustration and snapped a claw toward the blind girl. but Alexia vaulted over it and landed lightly on his shoulder like a monkey jumping onto a tree. Using one of the long, thorny protrusions coming out of his spine as footing, she then began raining down a salvo of ruthless punches on the 8th demon prince. Each punch was reinforced with vicious bursts of aura. Each punch slammed repeatedly into his neck and collarbone. Brutal impacts boomed in rapid succession, stacking shockwaves so tightly that they distorted the already distorted air around Vhagar even more. Tom, Tom, Tom. Vhagar actually grunted out loud as his massive frame buckled, his legs surrendering under the accumulated force of Alexia's savagery. Finally, he dropped to one knee. He reached up to grab her, but Alexia had already flipped backward and landed cleanly several steps away. That instant was seized by me. Something stirred behind Vhagar. The earth folded inward, then upsurged, molding itself under my will as a colossal humanoid shape rose from the ground like a stone giant clawing its way out of a grave. I manifested it only from the waist up, yet its torso alone was tall enough to dwarf small buildings, and shoulders broad enough to eclipse entire sections of the basin wall. The giant's body wasn't smooth, but jagged and rocky. And perched atop its head was a baseball cap emblazoned with 2 overlapping letters, N and Y. And, as you might have guessed, he was holding a baseball bat in his hands. The bat was crude and solid, but oversized enough to flatten a fortress. Even in the middle of battle, I felt an unreasonable amount of satisfaction at my creation. It was the first time I'd transmuted something that large and complex, well, aside from the crab mobile. Vhagar had just enough time to register the presence behind him. He began to turn, but it was already too late. The stone giant twisted at the waist, and the bat came swinging around in a barbaric horizontal arc. Thwomp! The sound of impact was deafening. When the bat connected with Vhagar's side, he was launched. Let me repeat myself, he wasn't merely knocked away. No, he was launched, like a ball hit for a home run. His massive body was sent flying, the golden restraints on his limbs and neck rattling loudly as he skipped across the lilac pond before smashing through a section of the caldera wall like a meteor. Boom! The cliff face was obliterated, rock and dust geysering skyward as Vhagar vanished into the crater. The aftershock rolled across the battlefield in a deep tremor. The stone giant followed through on the swing like a professional, bat humming as it came to rest on its shoulder in the most unapologetically smug pose imaginable. That ought to have dealt some damage, right? I muttered under my breath. Alexia smacked my forearm. I winced. Right, I jinxed us, didn't I? I did. We watched as loose stones clattered down into the newly formed crater and displaced petals drifted back to the ground. Then the rubble shifted slowly. From deep within the crater, a gravelly laugh came. It sounded broken at first, then steadily grew louder. Magnificent, Vhagar rumbled from beneath the debris, unmistakably pleased. To think mortal fledglings would force me to brace. Then the rubble exploded outward as he rose again. Cracked stone and lilac waters sliding down his shoulders, ember-bright eyes burning hotter than before. He stood at the edge of the crater, staring down at us with a toothy grin that sent a shiver down my spine. The shimmering golden cords around his neck and limbs were pulled taut like of ice, and I could visibly notice the strain it took for him to remain upright. It seemed this caldera truly was the limit of how freely he could move. So when pushed at the edge of it, he looked ready to fall. Still, he looked happy. Until he vanished, and reappeared right behind me. Or he would have, if I'd still been standing there. In truth, I had moved a split second before he teleported. So instead of finding me there like a sitting duck, he was greeted by Michael's sword, just as Juliana's rapier thrust into the back of his knee and forced his leg to dip at an awkward angle. Following that, Michael's shadowy blade crashed into the side of Vhagar's neck in a sweeping arc of darkness. Clang! The impact rang like steel striking an anvil, wisps of shadow screaming as they were shredded against the demon prince's pressure field. However, just like every other attempt we made before this one, the blow failed to seriously hurt Vhagar, let alone draw his blood. But it did move his head into the trajectory of an incoming lance of condensed white light that detonated upon contact with his face. Boom! Smoke billowed around his skull as Vhagar snarled and twisted, straightening his bent knee with a sharp crack and lashing out to grab anyone within reach. But there was no one. Juliana was already gone. And so was Michael. For a brief moment, I saw confusion clearly written vividly on Vhagar's face. How were we reading his attacks so accurately? How was our coordination so perfect? How were we reacting before he even finished moving? The answer was simple, and he realized it too. Our seer. Vhagar's gaze whipped to see Lily standing calmly at the cavern's entrance. Kong was on her right, and Vince on her left. You see, our strategy was simple. Alexia and I engaged Vhagar from the right flank, while Michael and Juliana assaulted him from the left. Ray functioned as long-range punishment, sniping with his lances whenever Vhagar overcommitted. Since Lily couldn't shout instructions without the Moon Eater hearing them too, we devised a workaround. Well, not we, Juliana. Her idea was for Kang and Vince to signal us using basic hand gestures. Kang's right arm would signal Alexia, while his left signaled me. Vince's right hand was for Michael, and left for Juliana. If Ray was in trouble, then both of them would flash a combined signal. With this, Lily could issue precise commands without shouting a single word, and we could fight in flawless sync. While effective for us, it was obviously a problem for Vhagar. He could try to obscure her line of sight, but who knew what other plans we had prepared for that scenario? So he muttered darkly in frustration, "You're a problem." Then, his towering form blurred, the air around him rippling like a heat haze, and in an instant, he was gone. 1 second, Lily stood at the cavern entrance, calm and composed. Next, her eyes widened. She tried to move from her spot. But Vhagar's massive claw slammed into her chest, pinning her to the ground with such speed that even a seer couldn't react, and with such force that it sent cracked spider webbing across the stone floor beneath her. Chapter 317, Fight Against the Moon Eater IV. Lily was down, and Vhagar was grinning, until he wasn't. Because still pinned beneath his claw, Lily's body began disintegrating into twinkling specks of black light, like dark fireflies. Scattering in the night, Vhagar's eyes widened just a fraction. Then he whipped his head around to peer inside the dark cavern behind him and saw a young woman with long, ash-blonde hair and haunting violet eyes staring back at him. Yes, this was our plan. We knew Vhagar would go for Lily, so we'd positioned her near the edge of the caldera, where she could not only bait the 8th prince with an illusion of herself, but also retreat to safety after doing her job. Vhagar acted quickly and swiped his claws again. Another discordant thrum followed, just like before. Lily braced herself and got ready to blast the cavern wall beside her to gouge out an alcove and dive into it if the demon were to unleash that same crescent pressure wave at her. But he didn't attack. Or, more precisely, he didn't attack her. The crescent wave of pulverizing pressure surged forward, but instead of coming for Lily, it struck the top of the cavern entrance and carved through the stone ceiling like a scythe through wet clay. Rock blasted outward, massive slabs shearing loose as the entire overhang collapsed in a roaring cascade of dust, debris, and boulders. All of it flooded down and drowned the entrance in a choking gray cloud. Lily's eyes widened as she understood what Vhagar was doing. And so did we all. He had turned our plan against us. He was cutting our seer off from the rest of us, removing her from the battle entirely. And as if on cue, the entrance vanished beneath tons of rubble, and Lily disappeared behind it. Okay, now we were in deep trouble. Or at least, we would have been if this wasn't also part of our plan. Yeah, this time, I had to give credit to Vince. He was the one who pointed out that even if Vhagar couldn't kill Lily outright, he'd either try to block the cavern to isolate her and cut her off from the battle. He'd make it so she wouldn't be able to assist us. That's why we were ready for this scenario. The moment Vhagar turned back around, a shadowy creature, roughly the same shape and size as a jellyfish, came floating and blew up in a burst of black cloud around his face, completely shrouding his head and blinding him. Then, a massive cannonball of molten lava, larger than several cars crushed together, plummeted from above. It slammed down on Vhagar and exploded into a river of white-hot rock that hissed and fumed as it made contact with the lilac pond's surface, sending jets of steam pluming into the sky. A few feet away, I saw my stone giant winding up. The colossal golem had discarded its bat and dug out an enormous chunk of the caldera floor, shaping it into a rough sphere like you'd make a snowball. Then I poured a good portion of my essence into agitating its molecules until the rock ball began to glow and sag, dripping like candle wax. After that, using every ounce of its strength, the giant swung its arm like a pitcher throwing a fastball and hurled the lava sphere straight at the demon prince. The attack was breathtaking, yes, but also exhausting. It drained a considerable amount of my essence. Thankfully, over the course of this journey, I'd expanded my essence pool significantly. If I was still a newly ascended B ranker, I would have collapsed on the spot. Hell, even now, my arms felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds each, while my lungs burned with heat and exertion. But the sight of Vhagar being swallowed by the molten deluge filled me with satisfaction. The lava hit him dead on and buried his massive frame in boiling, churning rock sludge that rapidly started cooling and hardening into volcanic obsidian. Then there was a moment of hesitation. We were torn. Do we make a run for the cavern at full speed now, or stay cautious and keep our guard up? Thankfully, we chose the latter. Because from deep beneath the solidifying sea of obsidian, another pulverizing wave erupted outward and shattered it like ceramic, spraying its splintered fragments everywhere. And just like that, Vhagar was freed. He was panting a little, but other than that, we weren't able to so much as spill a drop of his blood. I clicked my tongue in frustration. Fine, let's escalate it even more. The ground to the Moon Eater's far right trembled and split apart, deep fissures snaking across the caldera as I shaped something even larger. The earth bucked and molded itself into the form of a titanic dragon, its long body covered in jagged stone scales. The whole scene looked like a colossal earthworm slithering its way from underground. Deep within the stone dragon's yawning maw, I began heating the earth inside its stomach, melting it into liquid rock until the inlay between its scales started burning red hot. Then, with a whipping motion, the dragon retched and spat out the magma like a living cannon aimed straight at Vhagar. The torrential river of lava arced through the air with scalding heat, leaving a trail of sizzling distortion in its wake. But Vhagar was ready this time. Having somehow shaken off the blindness inflicted by Juliana's summon, he raised a claw before the lava could reach him and released another pulverizing wave. Only this one was different. The intensity was so extreme this time that the air itself seemed to fracture as invisible curves of pure spiritual force collided with the lava stream and shredded it apart mid-flight. Spurts of molten rock and droplets of magma rained down, discharging vapors of scorching steam the instant they touched the lilac water. We scattered to dodge everything: rock, steam, and even the displaced air. But Kevin wasn't so lucky. Oh yeah, Kevin was still there, enjoying the battle until one of the pulverizing waves hit him and, well, pulverized him. I caught it in the corner of my eye, shrugged, and turned my focus back to the Moon Eater. Hey, I'm not heartless. But I knew Kevin would be alright. At this point, I doubted anything short of soul severance or outright existence erasure could kill him. As long as there were any negative emotions present around him, he'd survive. And there ought to be plenty of those in the midst of a battle as blood-pumping as this. Chapter 318, Fight Against the Moon Eater V. So, yeah, I turned my attention to Vhagar. And Vhagar was going to be in trouble. You see, everything that happened after he buried Lily behind the rubble in the cavern happened within the span of a few seconds at most. So while Vhagar managed to render my latest attack useless, he failed to notice Vince and Kong sneaking up on him in that same instant. Thwack came the sound as Kong drove himself shoulder first into one of the Moon Eater's towering legs, spearing the back of his knee. Vhagar staggered forward with an irritated grunt, like he'd been bitten by a pest rather than slammed into by a partially transformed werewolf. But Kong held on, digging his sharp claws into the demon prince's coal-black skin, barely managing to even scratch it but still not letting go. Then he let out a loud howl and twisted, forcing Vhagar to wobble sideways. Vince didn't waste a second. He sprang off a fractured ledge nearby and connected a vicious cross to the side of Vhagar's chin with all the force he could muster. And it turned out that after being empowered by all his enhancement cards, reinforcing his body with the essence circulation technique, and vowing not to use his powers for the next 2 days in exchange for a 40% buff, he could muster a lot of force. Enough to almost rival Alexia's strength, even if for only a single, slightly mistimed punch. Enough to still bring Vhagar down to one knee. Yeah, not to brag or anything, but we made a heavily nerfed, extremely weakened demon prince kneel twice in one day while we were still teenagers. Anyway, Vince landed in a roll, quickly jumped to his feet, and immediately fled the area. He'd poured everything he had into that single strike. His job was done, but Kong didn't get the chance to pull away. Or rather, by the time he did, it was already too late. Vhagar snapped around, twisting his 12-foot-tall body at the waist, then grabbing the wolf boy and yanking him off his feet. Kang's eyes widened in fright as he was slammed into the ground hard enough to crater stone, the impact punching the breath clean out of his lungs. But before Vhagar could follow up and simply crush him right then and there, a lance of condensed white light rocketed in from the side. KWA boom! The explosion detonated against Vhagar's torso, swallowing both Kong and the Demon Prince in a thunderous bloom of fire and light. Even though we weren't close to the blast, the shockwave still made our ears ring. For a heartbeat, I thought Ray had overdone it. And I was right, because when the light faded, Vhagar was standing, looking just as unharmed as he was at the start of this battle. It was Kong who was knocked out instead, even though he wasn't even hit directly. Still, at least the blast dragged Vhagar's attention away from the teen wolf and toward Ray. The 8th Demon Prince drew a claw back, preparing to let loose another one of his signature pressure waves. Swish! But this time, several thorny, metallic vines erupted from the ground beneath his feet and lashed upward to wrap around his entire body and lock him in place. That was one of Vince's cards. He'd planted it there earlier and only needed to lure Vhagar into position. Since the Moon Eater was already significantly weakened by the golden restraints at the edge of the caldera, we only had two goals now. First, keep him there till I reach him. Second, shove him back like before so we could retreat into the cavern, where he wouldn't be able to follow us. There was just one problem. Vhagar could collapse the space around his body and teleport. That made everything messy. Why? Oh, no reason. Just that if he escaped to the center of the caldera, where he was comparatively strongest, he'd keep discharging those pressure waves indefinitely and inevitably kill us. And from the look in his eyes, that was exactly what he was about to do. We were still a couple of seconds away from him, especially me. I wouldn't make it to him in time. I could try to rush, but that would be reckless. Someone like him had to be holding something back. He had to have a hidden trump card that he still hadn't revealed to us. We were good, but there was no way we were good enough to have pushed him out of options so easily. Unfortunately, not everyone realized that. When Ray noticed Vhagar was about to vanish, he propelled himself forward by detonating two quick explosions behind him, like a jet engine firing off. In the blink of an eye, he was right in front of Vhagar's face, 12 feet off the ground. His hand slammed squarely into the Demon Prince's forehead as he unleashed a third explosion. I didn't need to guess that Ray had put everything he had into that attack, emptying every last drop from his essence reserves. The result should have been calamitous. But it wasn't. Cabo. Shri. There was a blinding flash of light, followed by the start of a roaring shockwave like a truckload of TNT going off, but all of it was cut short. The immolating flames swirling out of Ray's palm were suddenly snuffed out. It all happened in less than a heartbeat, but what I saw sent a chill through me. Ray's blast had been eaten. Let me clarify, it wasn't deflected, nor was it resisted. It had been eaten, like literally. The remnants of the explosion were dragged inward, spiraling into Vhagar's wide maw-like smoke down a drain. The Demon Prince inhaled everything, the light, the fire, and even the sound, slowly, as if savoring the taste, shiny orange embers shimmering around his jagged teeth. Ray dropped in front of him and froze, not from fear, but because invisible pressure clamped down on his body and pinned him in place as if he was anchored by unseen weights. Then thin streams of pale essence were torn from Ray's body, leaking from his eyes, mouth, and pores like ghostly mist and flowing straight into the Devourer's gaping mouth. Ray gasped, his face turning ashen, contorted by pain and horror. His jaw fell open in a soundless scream before he crumpled to his knees. Vhagar, still sucking in the threads of essence unraveling from Ray's soul, lashed out to plunge his claw toward his chest. No, Vince shouted and lunged forward. So did we all. Because instead of pausing to hesitate or calculate, the blind girl just launched herself at them. The ground cracked under her feet as she crossed the distance in a blur and cannoned her whole body into Ray, knocking him free of the draining grip just as Vhagar's claw was mere inches from his chest. So she did save him. But it was too late for her to get out of the way herself. KLAACH. Chapter 319, Fight Against the Moon Eater v. Vhagar's claw punched clean through Alexia's bronze armor. Despite the breastplate shielding her, despite both her essence and aura working overtime to fortify her body, there was no resistance at all. The Demon Prince's sharp talons burst out of her back as easily as a knife through a paper doll. The sound that accompanied it was a sharp metallic clang, immediately drowned by a wet squelch of flesh and bone being torn apart. Alexia gagged on her own breath. Her blood, as red as the eerie moonlight, sprayed like a geyser as all her cards flared brightly behind her. Then dissolved into shimmering motes of light, flowing back into her soul. That alone didn't mean she was dead. Nonetheless, it did mean something vital inside her body had been damaged. Well, obviously, she was impaled. But the dismissal of her cards indicated she had lost both the focus and the will to sustain them. And a fighter as experienced as Alexia von Zinks would never make such a mistake unless she was blacking out. All around the caldera, I heard everyone who was still conscious shout her name and rush toward her all at once. I didn't shout. I felt panic encroaching upon my chest, taking a hold of my heart in a wrenching grip. But it was replaced almost instantly, smothered beneath a sense of cold and steady calm. As Michael and Juliana sprinted past me, I stayed back in my place and stomped my foot into the ground. Then I waited until Vagar swiped his claws again, discharging that same, irritating pressure wave of his. Only then did I make the earth shoot up beneath me at a slanting angle, launching me forward like a cannon shot and sending me over both the crescent arc of destruction and my companions. The surrounding view blurred around me as I spun sideways in midair once. Vagar wasn't expecting me to use my allies as bait. So he wasn't ready to follow up immediately. All he managed was to weakly raise a claw toward his chin as I brought my axe around with everything I had. Thwack! The blazing blade of Scorched Oath bashed into the towering demon's claw in the side of his face, all my momentum compounding into a single, brutal slash. Of course, the spiritual pressure veiling his body was still far too dense for me to pierce. My blow amounted to practically nothing. It didn't even leave a mark. But it was enough to jerk his head violently to the side. A rippling shockwave rolled outward in the air from the point of impact, flattening rising steam plumes, splashing the lilac water, and cracking the ground beneath his feet. Vagar let out a growl so low and threatening that it sent a chill up my spine. By the time his head snapped back, however, I was already gone. I had twisted midair earlier, landed hard, and rushed toward Alexia's limp body. The lilac pond was shallow here. Her armor had already disintegrated into nothing. Streams of crimson blood continued to gush out of the large puncture wounds across her upper torso, staining the violet heather and mixing with the shimmering water until the pond around her darkened into a sickly shade of wine. I slid to a knee beside her and caught her before her body could slump fully beneath the surface. Her head lolled back weakly. Her fine lashes fluttered as frail, painful breaths rattled out of her chest. Her eyes were unfocused, and pupils trembling. Bad. This was really bad. She was alive, but barely. I lifted her. She was frighteningly light. My clothes were soaked through almost instantly with her blood. Panic threatened to fracture the icy clarity holding my mind together, but I refused to let it yet. Behind me, another rage-filled, terror-inducing growl shook the entire area. Vagar was clearly displeased that I'd slipped away from him so easily. But before he could get anywhere near us, 3 small wisps of light appeared out of nowhere in his field of vision and blew up in brilliant flashes, like flash grenades going off at point-blank range. Again, it wasn't enough to harm him. But it wasn't meant to. Instead, it was meant to blind him. At the same time, a blast erupted from the cavern entrance, clearing rubble in a violent outward sweep and opening a path. I didn't have to guess it was Lily's work. So with Alexia tightly cradled against my chest, I bolted toward it at the full speed that my B-rank physiology allowed. In my wake, chaos reigned. Vagar took virtually no time to recover, shaking off the sudden stun before whipping around in search of whoever had dared interrupt him. His gaze swept the battlefield and swiftly landed on a blue-haired boy a few meters away. It was Vince. Ray was slung over his shoulders in a fireman's carry, unconscious after having most of his essence forcibly drained out of him. Because Ray had fallen far too close to Vagar, Vince had originally wanted to ignore him. He really wanted to ignore him. He couldn't. So he'd risked a moment, dragged Ray up, but then he saw Vagar turning toward Alexia and me. And he couldn't ignore that either. So, while cursing himself, Vince bought me a moment to escape. But in doing so, he revealed his own position completely and drew the demon prince's full attention. Damn it, he muttered under his breath. This was why he hated the idea of friendship. It makes you do stupid things. Vagar snickered, stretching his lips into an inhuman grin that was far too wide, revealing rows of razor-like teeth that were far too sharp. Then he reached out. His movements were incomprehensibly fast for Vince to register. One heartbeat, the demon stood several meters away. One heartbeat later, he was right there in front of him, with his claws almost touching Vince's ribs. Almost touching. Because before they could have made full contact and disemboweled him, Juliana intercepted. Maybe Vince was biased, or maybe it was because he was still a rank lower, but to his eyes, Juliana's speed nearly rivaled Vagar's even if it didn't surpass it. He couldn't even tell when her katana descended. All he knew was that when it did, it collided with the demon's talons and smashed them downward with a sonic boom that nearly ruptured his eardrums. And just like that, Vince cleverly was saved. He could now live to see another day. Run, Juliana shouted, and he did. He sprinted past Kang's unconscious body floating in the pond. Unfortunately, his hands were already full. So with a grim apology, he dashed by and leapt into the cavern right after me. Chapter 320. A demon, a bird, and a swordsman fell from the sky. Meanwhile, Juliana's dual swords clashed with Vagar's claws in a rapid exchange of sparks and deafening sonic booms, until he folded space and vanished. Juliana quickly hopped back several paces and swung her wakizashi behind her with the full force of her newly ascended body. Swoosh! It cut through nothing but empty air. At a glance, it looked like a wasted swing. It wasn't. It would help her later. For now, though, she felt a presence, something heavy like a mountain plummeting toward her from above. Juliana craned her back to see Vhagar's towering figure dropping from the sky. Space buckled around him as gravity itself seemed to bend out of his way, his massive frame plunging down with murderous intent, his claws drawn back like executioner's blades. Juliana turned and ran, pushing herself to get out of the impact zone as fast as possible. Boom! The caldera floor convulsed, and lilac water erupted skyward in a massive ring wall like a reverse waterfall. Vhagar burst through it, looking every bit a vengeful god, already in motion and already chasing her. Juliana was fast, but the Moon Eater was on her in the blink of an eye. So she bent her knees and jumped. It was the wrong move. It accomplished nothing. Vhagar considered that it might be bait, but he didn't care. He chose to punish the insolent girl for her mistake and lashed out. But then her body suddenly started rewinding. Her upward momentum was immediately cancelled as she dropped back to the ground into the same crouched position she'd jumped from. Vhagar's claws passed harmlessly over her head. Then she began moving backward, just as fast as she'd been running forward, tracing her steps in reverse motion. Wah! Vhagar blinked, visibly thrown off. But he wasted no time in whirling around and giving chase to her once again. Juliana slid back to the exact point where Vhagar had crashed down like a meteor moments earlier, before stopping and turning around, presenting her back to him. For half a split second, Vhagar couldn't believe the audacity of this mortal girl. Then he unleashed a furious slash. His claws tore forward with enough force to peel the air apart, and met steel. Swoosh! Clang! Sparks flew as Juliana's wakizashi caught the strike, in the exact same slash she had made earlier. Vhagar's eyes widened. He realized that the wasted swing from earlier wasn't a waste at all. It was an anchor in time. Since this girl could pause, rewind, and fast-forward her body's personal timeline, she didn't need to rely on linear attacks. She could deal an attack before it had ever connected, so long as she made sure it would do so in the future. Vhagar was impressed by all of them. The level of skill on display by these human children far exceeded his expectations. And they were still young, still unfinished. He understood, then, that when these fledglings ever reached their full potential, most of them would surpass the current protectors of Earth, the monarchs. And to some extent, he was right. It would happen, but that story was still far away. In the present, Juliana cancelled her rewind at the exact instant her wakizashi deflected Vhagar's claw to the side. In her other hand, the katana vanished. A rapier replaced it. Vhagar's arm was still being forced inward. And since his massive limb was momentarily displaced, his side was open. Juliana had created a clear gap in his stance, so she stepped in to capitalize on it. She twisted her entire body with the momentum of the parry and drove the rapier straight toward the demon's chest. Vhagar had two choices now. He could tank the blow and crush her with the sheer mass of his larger body, swatting her away like the insect she was. It would be easier. Or he could. His lips curved back. He lunged forward and snapped his jaws shut. Crunch! His teeth bit down on the rapier mid-thrust. Metal screamed as the thin blade was caught between his jagged fangs. At the same time, his free claw surged toward her exposed side, turning Juliana's attack on herself as his talons aimed to skewer her clean through. It should have ended there. But it didn't, because he couldn't move. The lilac water around Vhagar's feet froze solid. Ice crawled up his body and locked him completely in place mid-motion. Yes, it was the courtesy of yours truly. His claw stalled inches from Juliana. She exhaled in relief, let go of her rapier, and jumped back, all in one motion. Then she yanked a kunai from somewhere. I don't know where. Swish! The kunai sped through the air and smashed into the bridge of Vhagar's nose with a thunderous crack. It still didn't pierce, but it did topple his center of gravity and sent the 8th demon prince crashing onto his back. Vhagar grunted and spat aside the mangled remains of the rapier. The thin blade was crushed like a toothpick between his teeth. But before he could recover any further, Kevin fell face first onto his skull, his beaks and wings and sheer vindictive mass colliding with a wet, vicious splat. That gave Juliana enough time to dash past the Moon Eater, scoop up Kong, and follow after us into the cavern. Vhagar roared as Kevin continued pecking at his face, trying to rip his flesh off out of sheer hatred. Get off, you pest! The demon prince bellowed before grabbing the bird and literally tearing him apart in equal halves, hurling both parts aside like trash. Then, when he looked up again, Michael was falling down on him this time. His dark sword raised high with layers of screaming shadows churning around it, he brought the fang of Zaldrith down with everything he had left. "Oh, come on," Vhagar started, throwing his hands up, but it was too late. Thwom! The impact shook the entire caldera. The lilac pond was shoved back beneath Vhagar for an instant, exposing cracked stone as fractures spider-webbed outward. And for the first time since this battle began, Vhagar's blood was drawn. He finally bled. A thin, shallow scratch marred his cheek, leaking a rivulet of viscous black liquid that was blacker than his charcoal skin. It was hard to see, but it was there. The silence that followed was only broken when the water came flooding back in. Michael remained standing over the Moon Eater's massive body, chest heaving and eyes wide as he stared at the mark he'd carved into the flesh of this godlike being. Then he raised the sword again, but froze. Because the shadows around his blade were vanishing. No, not vanishing. They were being eaten. They were being spiraled into Vhagar's open maw like smoke down a drain. Michael's instincts screamed at him to retreat, so he did. He did the exact opposite. He dismissed the sword and cocked his fist instead. "That fool," I snapped, yelling at him. "Idiot, get back here." Michael hesitated at the sound of my voice. When he saw Vhagar's mouth stretching wider, ready to suck in his essence, he clicked his tongue and leapt away, retreating into the cavern just after Juliana arrived with Kong. Inside, Lily and Vince were carrying Alexia between them toward the far exit on the other side. Her blood soaked their clothes, just as it had soaked mine. Juliana followed with Kong. Ray was left for Michael and me. But the two of us stayed back for a moment, watching as Vhagar sat up, then looked at us, and smiled. He rose to his feet and lifted a finger, pointing past us. I didn't need to turn to see who he was pointing at. I just knew it was Alexia. "Remember what I told you," Vhagar said calmly. "About fate." My jaw clenched. "It can't be changed. I have tried," he continued. "You can alter the path, but the destination will always arrive. The end will always be the same." I stomped my foot down again. A colossal stone fist ejected from the ground and shot toward him like a battering ram. Vhagar turned and started walking back toward the center of the caldera, not even acknowledging the incoming attack. The fist was pulverized mid-flight, reduced to dust by a casual pressure wave. When the dust settled, he was grinning at us over his shoulder. I stared back from the cavern entrance, breath short with anger, smeared all over in blood that wasn't mine but hurt just as much. "Your life is over, child," Vhagar said as he reached the center. The scratch on his cheek had already healed, his ember-like eyes much brighter than before. "Even if you escape this place, even if you change your fate, you will not have changed anything at all.